Yo, what is up, my dudes? Another day of quarantine and code, and we're gonna talk about how we can actually interact with people. Crazy, crazy. So, first of all, before we start with interacting with users of our program, let's talk about people that read our program. So, in Python, I could type out my code here, hello world, it's all fine and dandy. But at some point, I want to try to explain what's going on in my code to another person that's trying to read it. So in order to do that, we need something called a comment. And a comment in Python is just words that are written that are not read by the interpreter. So to signify that I have a comment, we use pound sign. And so I could say, this line tells the world I'm alive. So if I go ahead and run this, the only thing I'm going to see is hello world. Yeah, so all we saw is hello world. So this is a good way of being able to talk about what the next lines are going to be. You can also do them in line here. So here's a test. Did you see me? So if we run that, it's still just hello world. If we want to do if we want to do comments that span multiple lines, we need this thing called the three quotes, three triple quotes. It's common. So did this run as well? And that's a common pattern as well for Python. Technically, this just prints out. This just gives you a string that says this, but it's not being used anywhere in the interpreter, so it's a common pattern to use in Python. So that's how we tell the world about our program. Is with those comments. Next thing I want to talk about is variables. So with variables, before I mentioned how my name can be Brian. I guess I should move this over here. I guess I can't copy paste. So my name is equal to Brian. But and if I ask about what my name is, this is Brian. If I go ahead and I want to ask about if I want to change my name, I can change my name at any time. So I can say my name is now Mr. Brian. Things have gotten a little serious. It's now Mr. Brian. Now if I ask about my name, I get Mr. Brian. But it doesn't have to just be a string that I store in my name. I can actually change it to be something else, something entirely different. Apparently my name now is 42. So now if I ask the computer for my name, it's 42, and the computer has no problems with that. So we can actually see what type my name is by using this type method called type, and then open parentheses, kind of like the print. Give it a variable or just some data, and then close the parentheses. So I run this, and I expect that I'm going to get an integer here. So Python tells me that this is a class int. So the reason for this is Python is something called strongly typed, which means that every value has to have a type associated with it. So if I ask the type of of Brian, just a string, I expect that the class is going to be string. If I ask the type of 4.2, the class is going to be float. So everything in Python has to have a type. So that's useful of knowing because can't do certain operations on types, and we'll see that in a second here. Next thing is sometimes we're going to have to swap two things, so two variables. So let me show you a pattern called the swap pattern. So let's say that person 1 is Brian, and person 2 is Alex. Now, if I wanted to swap person 1 and person 2, I couldn't just say person 1 is equal to person 2. If I do this, and I ask for person 1, I get Alex. If I ask for person 2, I get Alex again. So at this point, I don't even have access to Brian. Brian is gone. Brian has disappeared from the planet. So for us, let's go ahead and reset here. So person 1 is equal to Brian. Person 1 is equal to Brian. And if you guys type a line and you want to go back to it, you can just hit this is the up arrow key on your keyboard. It'll go up one line. So let's see, person 1. That's what that is. So that's Brian. Let's clear this for a second here. And person 2 should be Alex. Cool. So to swap two variables, what we have to do is we need a temporary variable. So we have temp is equal to person 1. So now I'm going to show on the left hand side here. So person 1 is pointing to Brian. Person 2 pointing to Alex. Temp is now pointing to Brian. Because temp is now pointing to person 1, which is Brian. So if I do that, I should say Brian. Now the next thing I have to do is I kind of just have to rotate these. So Alex should go to person 1, Brian should go to person 2. So if I wanted to do that, all I would have to do is say person 1 is equal to person 2. Person 1 is now going to point to whatever person 2 is. So if I get rid of that, replace it, Alex is still there. Now if I see what's person 1, it should be Alex. It is. And the next thing I have to do is I have to have person 2 point to Brian, which is our temp variable. So person 2 is equal to temp. So now person 2 is equal to Brian. So that's just one way of being able to swap variables. Alright. Next thing is we're going to talk about user input. So input is a lot like ask in Python, in Snap. So if I ask, what's your name? What is your name? And then run this, it's going to print out, what's your name? And I'll say, oh, Brian. And that's great. Python thinks that's great. Good for you. So we gave it an answer, and we don't just get answer for free like we did in Snap. What we have to do is we have to assign the value that we get back from input to a variable. So let's say my name is equal to input. And then I'm going to go ahead and print my name. So let me run it again. So I'll print out Brian, and it prints me out Brian. So one thing to note here is if I try to run this on the old command line, we saw that when we ran it by itself, didn't print anything out once we got the response. We had to have this additional print. Now when I run, oh no, let's see if this works. There you go. Alright, so when I run this, I'm going to get, what's your name? And I'm going to put Brian. And see here is we actually printed out a line. And we actually printed out the line with the quotes around it. That's because input is actually returning a value back to something. So we need to catch that value at that moment. So that's why we have to do my name is equal to input. So that allows us to catch the value of input at that time. Additionally with this, you're going to have to, when we talked about inputs and stuff like that, inputs always give us back a string. So if I go ahead and I print, let's print the type of my name here, and then run this, I'm going to get back, go Brian, get back string. Let's say, what's your age? I would print this, and I would print 25, hit enter, and I get my name, or the variable, I guess it should be called my age now, my age. You'd think that it would be an integer, you know, I gave it the number 25, it gave it that. But in Python, everything's a string, or everything returned from input is a string, so we have to convert it. We have to convert it in some way. So you can actually do that. There's a couple of handy methods here. So we have the method int and string. And what these will do is this will take in a value, and this will give us the integer version of that value. You do the same thing for string, and this will give you the string version of that value. So what do I mean by that? So let's say I have the word one, or the string one. Let's call it my variable. My variable one, and I ask for the type of my variable. And get a string. Now, if I then say my variable is equal to int of my variable, and then ask for it, I get one without quotes. So then if I go ahead and ask about the type here, that's right here. So if I go ahead and ask about the type here, goodness, I get integer. So I've just converted my variable to an int, and I can go back too. So my variable is an int. Sorry, that's what I want. I want a string of my variable, and I want to set that to my. Oh my goodness, REPL, please help me. String. My variable is equal to the string of my variable. Alright. Now, if I ask, it should give me 1 with the quotes around it. And I look for the type, I get my variable, should get a string. So there you go. So that's how we convert types. Next thing is this is one little trick about printing stuff. This is the last thing I'll mention. This is one little trick about printing stuff. If we want to print things together, we can say print. Let's say my name is Brian, and I can print hello space close addition symbol, my name. So I can do that. This is hello Brian. But I also could do is I can print hello space hello, close the parentheses, do a comma, because I'm going to give it multiple values here, and then give it my name. What I'm going to get is also hello Brian. So this is going to be useful when you guys have to print out multiple things. So let's say that I also had my age. Age is equal to 25. So if I go ahead and print, and try to print that, it gets really cumbersome. I have to do hello space name space you are typing over my text apparently. You are my age. Oh my goodness. I'm not going to worry too much about it. But basically, if I wanted to do this, I could just print out. You can just print out hello, comma, name, age is my age. And this will print it out just the same without having to add multiple spaces. So that's just one little trick for print. So just to remember, first thing we did was we talked about comments. They're represented with a quote, and then you can write whatever, and the computer won't interpret it. Next thing was we learned about variables and types. We can set variables to any kind of type, and we can check the type with this method type. After that, we talked about input, and we can get user input at any time, and it returns a value. So we need to store that. We talked about how to swap variables, and lastly, we talked about being able to print multiple variables in one line. So good luck with that. Wish you all the best. See you later.